Dr. Todd Smith. Dr. Todd Smith has a Ph.D. in sociology from the University of Toronto. He has worked with a variety of Baha'i-inspired educational endeavors, published papers on science, religion, and freedom, and was most recently the coordinator of the research department at the Bahá'í World Centre, where he and his wife were serving for many years. Tonight's topic, as you should know, is identity, youth, and their contribution to world peace. In view of the many challenges facing the world today, including the crisis of identity that affects so many of us, he will consider paying particular attention to the youth, some of the habits and capacities we need to develop for humanity to realize its inherent oneness and achieve world peace. I just wanted to read you all a beautiful quote that was in our emails one more time. It is within your power to contribute significantly to shaping the societies of the coming century. Youth can move the world by the Universal House of Justice. Okay, I would like to turn it over to Todd Smith.
Actually, Todd, can I interrupt? Because I'm supposed to lead in with a nice song for you, and it would be.
I would like to turn it over to Brett instead.
I would like to turn it over to Brett as well.
Thanks. I had to make some last-minute changes to my audio, so I hope this is okay. Pass by whatever exists in this world and find me, find me. Pass by whatever exists in this world and find me, find me. I am the sun of perception, the ocean of science. I revive the withered ones and quicken the dead. I am the light that illumines the path of insight. I am the falcon of the hand of the Almighty. I bring healing in my wings and teach that knowledge is soaring. I bring healing in my wings and teach the knowledge of soaring to the heaven of truth. Pass by whatever exists in this world and find me, find me. Pass by whatever exists in this world and find me, find me. I am the sun of perception, the ocean of science. I revive the withered ones and quicken the dead. I am the light that illumines the path of insight. I am the falcon of the hand of the Almighty. I bring healing in my wings and teach that knowledge is soaring. I bring healing in my wings and teach the knowledge of soaring to the heaven of truth.
Well, thanks very much, Brett, for that beautiful introduction. And I just wanted to say that I'm very, well, also to Milan for introducing me. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. And it's wonderful to see, as Milan was saying, it's wonderful to see all of your faces and to be able to have this chance to talk with you about this extraordinarily significant topic and to think about the role of the youth and their significance for the progress of humanity. And I just want to let you know that what I'm going to share with you tonight, I'm actually testing with you because I'm looking at turning this into an article of sorts. So I hope you don't mind that I'm testing it on you, and you can tell me whether or not it works or not, whether or not it makes sense or not. At the end, you can give me thumbs up or give me thumbs down, or you can, you can do the little heart sign. That would be the best thing because that's nice and neutral and it conveys a sense of love. But I wanted to just begin by recognizing the state of the world that we're in right now. And one of the fundamental beliefs of the faith is that we are inevitably going to be achieving world peace, that humanity is moving inexorably in that direction. But that in order to achieve this state, which humanity has always been striving towards, whether or not it knows it has been striving in that direction, we are experiencing two fundamental forces at work in the world today. One is the forces of integration, and one is the force of disintegration. And I would say that right now, the forces of disintegration are extremely palpable. They're extremely present on our minds. And I think the way I like to think about it is that there are three sort of fundamental categories of forces of disintegration that are very much plaguing our minds right now. So I'll just share with you these three categories and then use them as a launch pad to move on to the major topic before us. So the first category is what I call the category of calamities. And as you all know, we're meeting tonight because of the pandemic. The pandemic is a global situation. It's obviously been horrible in many respects. It has some positive sides insofar as we're learning how to connect in certain ways, like through Zoom, for example. But it's certainly been a situation that many have found extraordinarily difficult and has caused tremendous suffering. So this is just one example of a calamity. Another example of a calamity is the environmental situation that we're facing, global warming, which is a long-standing calamity and is slow at work in the world today. And many people, because of these calamities, are feeling a sense of desperation. They're feeling a sense of distress because they're really recognizing that the world doesn't have its act together. The world is not acting in a united way in order to deal with these calamities. And they are distressed because they perceive this disunity, but they're not able to perceive how to advance beyond it in order to address these particular calamities. So that's one category. A second category of crisis I call the us versus them crisis that is definitely permeating the world today. We see this in the form of racism, which has emerged, as you know, has always been present, but has become quite palpable in the last couple of years, especially in certain countries. We see it in the form of party politics. We see it in the way in which politicians react to each other. We see it in the form of tribalism and people retreating into their various political tribes or their religious tribes or their whatever the tribes are. And but the basic idea is a sense of this is who we are, and we want to maintain our particular identity. And in order to maintain that particular identity, you have to create a sense of there is a them, and the them has to be demonized. The them has to be put down in some way. So that's the second major crisis that's pervading humanity at this time, is the us versus them crisis. And I just wanted to read one passage from the Universal House of Justice, which really brings this point home. This is from the Universal House of Justice, is the governing body of the Baha'is of the world. And on 18 January 2019, it states, humanity is gripped by a crisis of identity as various peoples and groups struggle to define themselves, their place in the world, and how they should act. Without a vision of shared identity and common purpose, they fall into competing ideologies and power struggles. Seemingly countless permutations of us and them define group identities ever more narrowly and in contrast to one another. Over time, this splintering into divergent interest groups has weakened the cohesion of society itself. So we see this form of identity crisis basically being manifested all over the place at this point in time, and is particularly wrapped around, unfortunately, wrapped around issues of race and wrapped around issues of politics, and obviously wrapped around issues of religion in many parts of the world. And there are other forms of us versus them that exist. And the last crisis I would, or category of crisis, I would call the crisis of alienation. And this is basically a crisis that really is affecting youth tremendously these days. There's a book out that's called The Coddling of the American Mind. And if you have a chance to read it, I would recommend that you do. But they basically described how youth who were born since 1995 are really a new generation of youth that feel that reality is meaningless, that reality really has no purpose to it. There's a sense of a tremendous lack of purpose that they associate with reality. And this has been driven largely, according to this analysis, by the rise in various forms of technology. And I don't want to come across as being anti-technology, because that's definitely not the case, and we certainly wouldn't want to move in that direction. But the way in which we're using technology at this point has really created an environment in which people are retreating into their various echo chambers, for example, or they might be on Twitter, for example, they might be posting, and they spend much of their time waiting for the instantaneous acknowledgement of what they posted. So in this book, they describe how youth, for example, will post something, and then before they can actually go to sleep at night, they wait to see how many likes they get on that particular post. And that's the sense of validation that they have. But that validation is extraordinarily short-lived, as you all know. And it creates a sense of, again, that there is a lack of meaning to life. That meaning really has to be instantaneous, and it has to be repeatedly energized. I was just listening to a TED Talk before this fireside, and the TED Talk was, I think, called Connected But Alone. And the idea there is that we're all much more connected as a worldwide community through technology. But because of these devices, because of the way we interact with each other, because of all the texting we do, all the tweeting we do, we're actually much more alone. So we're connected, but we don't feel a sense of true connection with each other. And this is, again, affecting the youth of this age tremendously. So what I wanted to do, so these are the three crises the three major categories of crises that I think are affecting humanity at this point. And for me, it all boils down to what it means to conceive of ourselves as actual selves, to conceive of ourselves, as Baha'u'llah says, as noble beings. So I think Brett's going to now share screen. If you can do that, Brett. So this is the point where I'm starting to see whether or not this makes sense. What I wanted to suggest to you is that when we think about identity, we can think about 4 different elements of the self. So at the bottom, we have what I'm calling the sacred element. And this is the idea that within each of us, in the hidden words, it says, "Thou art my lamp and my light is in thee." So the concept here is that within each one of us as noble beings, there is the light of God within us. And that within each of us are these attributes of God. And that our role in this world is to polish the mirror of ourselves in order to better reflect the attributes of God. So that's one fundamental element of what it means to be a person, of what it means to be a self, of what it means to be a noble being. The second one, the second yellow one, is called the cosmopolitan element. And this is basically the idea that we are part of one humanity, that what's essential to us as human beings is our oneness with everybody else in this world. And that there actually is, in the eyes of God, no such thing as color, for example, except for what Abdu'l-Baha refers to as the color of servitude to God. That is the essential color. That is what belongs to each of us inherently as noble beings. So the yellow elements, in my understanding, are the fundamental elements of what it means to be a human being. And this refers to what I'll talk about later as being our twofold purpose as human beings. Now, the green elements are also important elements. The first one is the unique element. And this has to do with each of us as individuals as we grow and develop, and by virtue of who we are innately, but also by virtue of how we're educated. We develop certain capacities and aptitudes, and we develop certain interests. And so this makes us diverse. We are distinguished from each other by virtue of these capacities and aptitudes and interests. So for example, my brother Brett began this fireside beautifully by singing a beautiful song. I have to tell you, last week or 2 weeks ago, when he did the fireside on Resvon, I was thinking to myself, for this fireside, could I pick up my old recorder, which I used to know how to play 35 years ago, and get good at it again, and then bring it to this particular fireside? And I realized that I failed pretty badly at that. So I don't have that particular aptitude, the way that Brett has that particular aptitude, even though we were raised in the same family and we have very much the same genetic material. So we're distinguished in that regard. And then the fourth element is what I'm referring to as the group element, which has to do with our secondary identities as human beings. And it's related to what groups we associate with. Now, these groups can be religious groups. These groups can be, well, I am a man, or another person would say I am a woman. You can have certain identities associated with who you are in relationship to other groups of individuals. Now, the problem, in my understanding, is that as human beings in this day and age, we spend too much time in the green. We spend too much time focused on our unique capacities, on our unique aptitudes, and our unique interests. And we spend too much time trying to develop those and be recognized for those particular unique elements as to who we are. And even worse than that, we can carry it so far that we can fall into narcissism. And these are words that I've crossed out because the whole point is to avoid these particular states. Or we can fall into what's called me-centrism, which is the sense of it's all about me. We can fall into a sense of entitlement, like I deserve this, I deserve that. And that becomes the focus of our lives. And then on the group side, we also spend too much time in this area of life, focusing on our secondary identities, which can lead to states like nationalism, fascism, which is an ideology, which, as you may know, is a horrible ideology that was related to Nazism and was related to what went on during the Second World War. I won't get into the details of that, but more generally, it boils down to prejudice. It can be manifested in religious fundamentalism and especially factionalism in the political realm as well. So humanity at this stage is, as I was mentioning before, spending too much time focusing on the green side of who we are as human beings. And this is not to say that the green is not important. It's just that it has taken over and has basically wiped out our focus on the yellow. And so now, on the other hand, if we can focus too much on the yellow as well, and for example, we can go into, on the sacred element, we can remove ourselves from society, become hermits, for example, become ascetics, for example. And on the cosmopolitan side, we can focus too much on being rational human beings, for example. We can focus too much on being scientific and ensuring that everything is pervaded by science and that sort of thing. So those can also fall into negative territory. But in my understanding, what's essential is recognizing the foundational nature of the sacred element and the cosmopolitan element. And that when that becomes the foundation, then the green on top of it, the unique element and the group element, can actually be expressed in much more healthy ways. And we don't fall into the traps of us versus them, for example, which is pervading society at this time. So the yellow is the unity side of what it means to be a true self. And the green is the diversity side. And as we know in the Baha'i faith, there is an emphasis on unity in diversity. And you can see that the unity and diversity, the relationship between the two, is both at the individual level as well as at the group level. So if we can just go down a little bit, Brett. So in the blue there, text there, it says the elements of unity are foundational, essential for true diversity, which in turn fosters unity. So again, the relationship between unity and diversity. And then the question becomes, how do we actually cultivate these two, the sacred element and the cosmopolitan element? And this is where I start to get into a focus on what the youth are doing. But just in general, there's an emphasis on the faith about many elements that are in dynamic relationship with each other, or what you can call an interplay with each other. There's the emphasis on individual transformation and social transformation, that those two things need to go hand in hand at all times. The individual transformation is related to the sacred element, and social transformation is related to the cosmopolitan element. And directly tied to those two are the interplay or the dynamic relationship between worship and service. So focusing on our inner being and then also focusing on our outer being. So, and then there are a few others that we'll get to, but if right, you can just scroll down now. And I just wanted to read a few passages, and then I'm going to ask my lovely nephew, Eli, to share a few comments after we focus on these passages. But I just wanted to share with you specifically the second one under individual and social transformation. And again, this is from the Universal House of Justice. The House of Justice says, increasingly, these young people will emerge, it can be expected, from the Junior Youth Spiritual Empowerment Program, imbued with a strong twofold purpose, both to develop their inherent potentialities and to contribute to the transformation of society. So this is the focus of the Junior Youth Program, and this is the focus of the youth who are working with these junior youth, is to develop this, to focus on this twofold purpose and to focus on developing their inherent potentialities and their contribution to the transformation of society. And then this is very much achieved by the second dynamic between worship and service. So the first one I'd like to read is about prayer. It says, prayer is the essential spiritual conversation of the soul with its maker, direct and without intermediation. It is the spiritual food that sustains the life of the spirit. Like the morning's dew, it brings freshness to the heart and cleanses it, purifying it from attachments of the insistent self. It is a fire that burns away the veils and a light that leads to the ocean of reunion with the Almighty. So these are such beautiful words, again, from the Universal House of Justice. But again, the emphasis is on cultivating the sacred element of the self by having this direct connection with our maker. And then if you look at the third quote down from there, if you can, I can't quite read it off the screen, so I'm going to read it off my own tablet. That's better, thanks, Brett. So if you go 4 lines down, the House of Justice says, not surprisingly, it is your age group that is gaining the most experience at aiding junior youth and children too, with their moral and spiritual development, fostering in them capacity for collective service and true friendship. After all, aware of the world which these young souls will need to navigate, with its pitfalls and also its opportunities, you readily appreciate the importance of spiritual strengthening and preparation. Conscious as you are that Baha'u'llah came to transform both the inner life and external conditions of humanity, you are assisting those younger than yourselves to refine their characters and prepare to assume responsibility for the well-being of their communities. As they enter adolescence, you're helping them to enhance their power of expression, as well as enabling a strong moral sensibility to take root within them. In so doing, your own sense of purpose is becoming more clearly defined as you heed Baha'u'llah's injunction, let deeds, not words, be your adorning. So I'd like to ask Eli if you could share a little bit about, if you could elaborate on this particular passage of the House of Justice in light of some concrete experiences that he's had.
Hey everybody, thanks Todd for asking me to speak. Yeah, I'm really happy to share some insights. For those of you who don't know, the Junior Youth Spiritual Empowerment Program is a program worldwide that helps junior youth, or those who are aged around 11 to 14, to develop these new spiritual capacities to help change the world. So in my experience working in this program, I've come to see that firstly, I believe that junior youth are probably the world's greatest untapped potential, and in order to solve all these conflicting problems. At the beginning of the talk, Todd was mentioning a lot of these disintegrative forces that are tearing apart our world. And they're all, if you think about them, they all have a spiritual core problem instead of a physical core problem. It's not that we don't have enough money or enough jobs. They're all in reality spiritual problems. So I see that developing this capacity within junior youth is as I said before, the world's greatest potential. So the question then naturally comes, well, how do you build these capacities within these junior youth? And so in the past few years, I've come up with a few core things that I think really help all junior youth to grow to their largest capacity. And so the first thing that I've discovered through this junior youth program is the use of a mentor or an older youth as a friend, which is called an animator in the junior youth program. Why I think this is such an important aspect to the capacity development of junior youth is because it's not a teacher in the sense that they're being told what to do, but now junior youth have reached the age where they can start to think for themselves and their capacity is being grown. So by having someone who's slightly older than them, who have just gone through that phase of life, this critical phase of life, to think about the world's deep problems and how they themselves can see helping the world, it makes a really big difference in how they grow up to be. So that's I would say one capacity, is having an animator or an older youth guiding them. I also think the second thing that really helps develop the capacity of these junior youth is having study or spiritual discussions, specifically on the Word of God. I think a lot of junior youth, or most people, are out of touch with spiritual writings, and these spiritual writings can really have a power to penetrate the heart and change the way that people will be for the rest of their life. One very key thing about the age of the junior youth is it's like the age where a tree is, or a sapling is turning into a tree. It's not yet fully grown, its roots have not yet taken place, but they're still being formed. So if during this period of life, study of spiritual writings or the Word of God is a regular pattern, that will stay forever, which is very close to the third aspect, I think, of developing capacity, which is actually making efforts to serve the community that you're around. Serve as in help do community service projects, whether very simply like cleaning up parks, or thinking more complicated, how can you help the spiritual education of those younger? What this does, I believe, is helps the junior youth from a very young age think about what are the spiritual problems of the place that I live in. So from very young age, 12, 13 years old, they're already thinking about how they can help the community around them in a spiritual manner. This is often overlooked from society as they are not yet seen with that potential, which I think is a very important part. This also reinforces the idea of a twofold moral purpose, as Todd brought up earlier. The idea that one's purpose in life is to develop themselves spiritually and intellectually through this study, while at the same time thinking critically about how to transform their society. So there is a real purpose, and it's not how many likes you get isn't your purpose. I'll talk about one more thing that I believe helps develop people's capacities, and it's this idea of true friendship or true love, because this really serves as an encouragement for people to step up, and maybe it's a bit scary at first to take these first steps, but through this love, and not only love, but the ability to believe in junior youth. And I know that kind of sounds cliche, but I'll give an example. Recently, I started a junior youth group last summer, and so we spent some weeks thinking about what is the purpose of this group. And they decided that as we moved through the year, that the purpose was to share these uplifting quotes with their friends. And only when we had believed in them to come up with these solutions. One junior youth, for example, made an Instagram account to share these quotes with their friends. It's a very small example, but it shows that when you actually believe that they are able to make a difference, it makes a profound change. And as I mentioned before, often society suppresses this age group. And I just have a quote to end off that the Universal House of Justice shared. They say, global trends project an image of this age group as problematic, lost in the throes of tumultuous and physical and emotional change, unresponsive and self-consumed. While the junior youth program sees in junior youth instead altruism, an acute sense of justice, eagerness to learn about the universe, and a desire to contribute to the construction of a better world. And only when you see this within the junior youth will change actually happen and these spiritual illnesses be addressed in the world.
Thank you so much, Eli. That was wonderful. I'm really happy with myself that I invited you to say some words. So, no, it's always wonderful to have Eli sharing his thoughts and other members of the family sharing their thoughts. But what I want to do is, Brett, if you can put back up the document again. If we can go down, I want to build directly on what Eli just said. So go down a few. So where it says independent investigation and consultation, this is another dynamic that exists in the Baha'i faith, an emphasis on the independent investigation of truth, but then also an emphasis on consultation. And tied with consultation is this concept of love that Eli was referring to. And this is another passage from the Universal House of Justice. It says, ultimately, the power to transform the world is affected by love, love originating from the relationship with the divine, love ablaze among members of a community, love extended without restriction to every human being. This divine love, ignited by the word of God, is disseminated by enkindled souls through intimate conversations that create new susceptibilities in human hearts, open minds to moral persuasion, and loosen the hold of biased norms and social systems so that they can gradually take on a new form in keeping with the requirements of humanity's age and maturity. So the youth are learning how to embrace this form of love, to engage in these types of conversation, these intimate conversations, in order to create new susceptibilities in human hearts, as the House of Justice says, to open minds to moral persuasion. This is a very profound thing because, as I was mentioning at the beginning, much of the way we communicate with each other right now is over social media. But even more than that, the way that we've learned how to communicate with each other is extremely influenced by this concept of us versus them, that everything is a contest. And what the House of Justice is helping us to understand that really it's not about being in a contest. It's about imbuing everything that we do with this spirit of love. And it is only in that way that we can actually open up hearts and arrive at mutual understanding. And tied with this concept of love is the notion of what Baha'u'llah refers to as a kindly tongue, which he says is the lodestone of the hearts of men. It is the bread of the spirit. So this is the way in which the youth are learning how to communicate with each other, and how the youth, when they're interacting with the junior youth, are helping those junior youth to do exactly the same thing. So if you can go back up again, Brett. And no, that's a bit too far. Go down. There you go. So one thing also that's really important is that the youth are learning about what it means to be in a learning mode. what it means to foster universal participation, what it means to create environments in which the generation of knowledge, which is beneficial to humanity, is central to our consciousness. And part of this is this relationship between action and reflection. So they're learning how to be of service. They're learning to go out and do things. But at the same time, they're learning how to reflect with each other. They're learning how to consult with each other. They're learning how to take measure of what's being accomplished. And they're learning how to do this all through the lens of the Word of God. There's a very, for me, I mean, I think for everyone, this is a very powerful hidden word from Baha'u'llah. It says, "O son of being, bring thyself to account each day, ere thou art summoned to a reckoning." So right in the hidden words of Baha'u'llah, we are told that we have to engage in this process of reflecting on what we do during the day. And it's a systematic process. You know, perhaps when we're saying prayers before we go to bed at night, we're thinking about how did we behave during the course of the day? What could we have done differently? What could I have done differently throughout the course of the day? And what changes can I make the next day? So this process of reflection at the end of acting throughout the course of the day is built into the revelation of Baha'u'llah. And as a part of being, is an essential aspect of being in a learning mode, which we're being encouraged to be on by the Universal House of Justice. So the house again says, to follow a path of service, whatever form one's activity assumes, requires faith and tenacity. In this connection, the benefit of walking the path in the company of others is immense. Loving fellowship, mutual encouragement, and willingness to learn together as are natural properties of any group of youth, sincerely striving for the same ends, and should also characterize those essential relationships that bind together the components of society. So again, another critical element of what it means to be a part of this youth movement and help humanity to advance to a stage of oneness and to a stage of world peace is to learn alongside each other and to engage in this process of action and reflection, and to do so in this prayerful attitude as discussed above. And then just lastly, because I'll wrap it up soon, but there are many elements that are in interaction that we have to always consider. And a fundamental interaction is between the spiritual and the material. And this is something that the youth are learning how to think about more effectively, because oftentimes we fragment the spiritual from the material. But in this passage, Abdul Baha says that we have to think about these two calls to success and prosperity that can be heard from the heights of the happiness of mankind. One is the call of civilization, of progress of the material world, and the other is the soul-stirring call of God, on which depends the eternal happiness of humanity. And then it goes on and gives a beautiful metaphor of how these two calls are related to each other. The spiritual call, the call of spirituality, is the light, and the call of civilization, or the call of the material, is the lamp. And both need to come together and be harmonized with each other. And the last thing I wanted to point out, if you go to the bottom, Brett, is the relationship between moment and time. And this for me is a really interesting one, because there's, as I was mentioning at the beginning, there's so much emphasis in this day and age on getting feedback that will make one feel good about oneself immediately, and living in the moment. And there's so much emphasis on living in the moment that's tied to our consumer culture, which, by the way, the Universal House of Justice refers to as the opium of the people, that consumerism is the opium of the people. What's interesting is that you might know that Karl Marx referred to his religion as being the opium of the people, but the House of Justice has said, no, it's actually consumerism which is the opium of the people. And part of being in that state where we're surrounded or we're have ingested this opium is to always to strive to live in the moment. And when something becomes boring, you move on to the next thing. And you do things in order to receive this feedback so you can feel that sense of affirmation in the moment. The other side is that you can get lost in the past, or you can be fretting always about the future. And in my understanding, the House of Justice is helping us to understand that we actually have to bring these both together. That yes, we do want to live in the moment. For example, when we're having an intimate conversation, or as the House of Justice says here, having a readiness to listen. That's living in the moment, but that's living in the real moment when you're having an intimate conversation or when you're communing with God. But at the same time, we also have to have a view of history, a sense of direction as to where we're going, and that we can, so that we can situate every moment that we're having, every intimate conversation that we're having, every act of accompaniment that we're having within this overarching sweep of history that we're all engaged in, which is inevitably about the movement of humanity towards its oneness. And as the House of Justice says, such is the view of history that underlies every endeavor pursued by the Baha'i community. Now, I firmly believe that, and as the House of Justice says, the youth are really learning how to bring the moment together with an understanding of history, which is unprecedented. We've never had a situation where this conjoining is taking place like it is taking place now. So, Brett, if you can go back to the chart again. So if you can just look at the blue, just down below. Sorry, that's right. So what I've been sharing are these 6 dynamics. I call them the 6 dynamics of human flourishing. And in my understanding, these 6 dynamics, and there are many more of them as is listed below, are all essential to fostering these elements of what it means to be a self, the sacred element and the cosmopolitan element. The focus on one's inner being and the focus on one's outer being, insofar as we are all related to each other, we're all interdependent. And by focusing on these dynamics and really embracing them, we can help to overcome this crisis of identity that the Universal House of Justice talked about. We place more emphasis on the yellow elements, and then the green elements really flourish for what they are. And then we have this true unity and diversity, both at the level of the individual as well as at the level of the collective. And the youth are very much at the forefront of figuring this all out. And by virtue of their efforts in this regard, this is what's going to propel humanity closer and closer to what it means to be one humankind and to achieve world peace. So I think I'll stop there, and yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity. It's wonderful to see you.
Thank you so much, Todd. Now, everybody, real quick, if anyone has any questions, you may now unmute and speak. Try and see if anyone else is unmuted and is about to ask a question as well, just so we don't have too many voices jumping in. But please, go ahead.
Well, just to take the opportunity to say thank you. That was fantastic, a lot to think about. And since you asked at the beginning of your talk, 2 thumbs up. You asked if, for your future papers or whatever. Please continue. This was fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Todd, wondering if you could say a few words about hopelessness. You did touch on it, but some of the friends on this call, Grace and her sister Brigitte, they had posted a video that depicted, you know, the strife and injustice in Cameroon, their home country, and it just really struck me as just a situation that just seemed like quite a lot of despair and hopelessness. I don't know if you had any words, or even if Grace or Brigitte wanted to comment more. This was a group separate to this. We have a study circle group going, and that was just a recent, you know, exchange. There's a number of other people on this call that are in that group.
Can I just clarify? So this is in light of particular catastrophes that are occurring, or is it, you just provide a bit more context?
I can, or Grace or Brigitte are welcome to. I mean, in general, it was just describing the oppression and injustice and the suffering of a great many masses of people.
Well, that's a big topic. Sorry, go ahead.
Hi everybody. Thank you, Maureen, for mentioning that. My name is Brigitte. I live near Boston, and the crisis in Cameroon has been going on for since late 2016, and this is the Cameroonian government that has been marginalizing the Anglophone section of Cameroon, where we grew up, my sister and I. And basically, the rest of the world has, especially France know this is going on, but they're not doing anything. And people are dying every day. I mean, I can't even tell you how many of our relatives we have lost in this, it's almost like ethnic cleansing, where the Anglophone Cameroonians have been killed, the women raped, and children have not been going to school for God knows how long now. And there's a lot of Cameroonians that have already migrated into neighboring Nigeria and living in the bushes. I mean, there's a lot of information on the internet. It's just that it is so heartbreaking. I don't like to follow this news on a daily basis. I just saw that video yesterday with the Cameroonian lady who had to just, she fell on the feet of one of the government officials in Australia. And so that video came to my attention. I said, wow, I will share with my friends in Canada and see if they can also spread the word. I mean, when this thing first started back late 2016, my sister Grace was visiting with me here in Boston. And I think we were among the first group of Cameroonians to go and petition in front of the French consulate in Boston. And there were many other rallies in Washington, D.C., in New York, at the United Nations, all over the world. People have, you know, all the Cameroonians in the diaspora, they've done everything they can. But the Cameroonian president, who has been in power for God knows how long, over 45 or 50 years, he's not addressed this crisis at all. So I don't know what could be done, but it's just we can't even think about going back to Cameroon to visit. You know, so thank you, Maureen, for asking us to say something about it. But that's I share it with you because I know how thoughtful and kind you guys are. You may find a way to spread the word.
And thank you very much for sharing that. You know, that form of human suffering is absolutely atrocious, and I think that from a Baha'i perspective, I mean, I can only talk in generalities. I can't talk about that specific situation effectively. But speaking in generalities, I think Baha'is recognize that at the core of this, at the core of such issues, it's fundamentally a spiritual issue, and it's fundamentally an issue where humanity, human beings, as they treat each other, are not focused on what, you know, the sacred element of each human being, and recognizing that sacred element, that light within each human being. And then secondly, not recognizing our inherent oneness with each other, which, you know, speaks to this worldwide community that we're all a part of. So I think where Baha'is take a learning approach to trying to learning how to build community, and see that as fundamental to invariably shift into a world where such atrocities don't take place. There's also a sense of urgency because of the suffering that you described, in order to, you know, to share this wonderful message of Baha'u'llah with the world, recognizing from a Baha'i perspective that the only way in which such atrocities are going to be overcome is through a spiritual revolution. So there's been so much emphasis on many parts of the world on the material side of development, which is a critical part of development, but it's certainly not sufficient, as we well know, and can certainly lead us down horrible paths if we just focus on the material. That needs to be not just balanced out, but infused by a focus on the spiritual nature of what it means to be a human being and our connection with God. So that's my understanding of it. And I can't address the very specific situation that you've talked about, but I do feel that invariably, I mean, as we refer to it, the only healing medicine for humankind is the Word of God at this time. And as this talk has been about, the youth are learning intimately through the processes that Eli so beautifully described about what it means to share this Word of God and how to transform hearts so that we don't move in these horrible directions that we moved in. But others should feel welcome to share their thoughts as well. But thanks again for sharing that. It is really appreciated.
I just wanted to add one thing, and I think the Baha'is are encouraged to contact UN, and for example, the Baha'is of Iran, against all the atrocities that are happening, against the torture, the murder, the torture of the kids in the schools and everything else. It has a different face, but it is injustice. So the Baha'is are encouraged to actually share the news with their friends, go to the United Nations and go to authorities who might be able to change the circumstances. So this has been one of the approaches that the Baha'is of Iran, after a long duration of suffering and after a lot of action reflection, came to understand that we need to be proactive against injustice.
I think just in continuation of what was said, you know, as we know, the old world order is sort of rapidly gaining its goals and, you know, putting check marks next to it. And so how can we balance that with the new world order being unrolled? And as Todd put it so beautifully at the beginning, that the disintegration forces are so palpable, especially today in today's condition. And so it reminds me, we hear stories like, you can either give a hungry person some fish or teach them how to fish for themselves so that they don't go hungry long term. And I think just looking at the world around us, it has to be a two-pronged approach. We can't just tell a starving person, no, first you have to do this and that. The person might die in the process of just trying to learn. But it's a two-pronged approach of, as Farouz said, we have to, each one of us, do our due diligence in unrolling this spiritual solution, this medicine that will really heal so much of the issues of the world. But at the same time, we can't, not that we're doing that, but giving extremes. We can't just sit and pray and say, God will help us, but we have to do our share of doing everything we can, such as what Eli, mentioned, with the junior youth, and you touched upon. The whole topic of tonight is, starting from our young, and for them to really help with their vision and energy, positive energy, to unroll this new world order and help us do that.
If I may just add to it, Bridget, I want you to know that I personally think that had it not been for international authorities and the Baha'is appealing to many different places and people, a genocide would have happened as far as the Baha'is are concerned. And I somehow have a great conviction in my heart. The same thing that happened in Srebrenica, 30,000 people were massacred. So 3,000, sorry. So basically what I'm saying is that it is very important for individuals to be individually active against injustice, but in a very positive and helpful manner, so not to lose their humanity the same way that Todd was talking about it. But I'm a firm believer in activism and in moving forward for peace and justice.
Go ahead, Sheila, and then Brett.
I like very much, you want feedback about your presentation, and I like it because it's compartmentalized, that it's intersections. I just like the way you do it. Now, you can see from the gray hair, I'm no longer a youth. I'm a senior youth, and I struggle to. How can I help a junior youth? I don't even have any around me. Now, when I was at Llewellyn for several years, I took Book 5 over and over again because we had youth in and out of there. But part of my frustration is, but what can I do now? I've made notes on what you've said, and I want to follow up on this, but then I meet a roadblock. So if you or anyone else has any ideas of what a senior person can go out, and I can't just go find a youth on the street and give them this wonderful message. So, but thank you. This is wonderful. I love what you've done.
Thank you, Sheila. Actually, if you don't mind, Brett, can I just respond? I'm actually glad you raised this, because my next comment was going to be about how, even though the focus was on youth today, this doesn't preclude all of us from being a part of this. I think that all of the different dynamics that we talked about are relevant to everybody. I just think that the youth are playing they're at the vanguard, as the House of Justice talks about, and they're learning about this intensively. But all of us can participate in this enterprise that we have been given through the revelation of Baha'u'llah. And, you know, one thing, it was really interesting when I came back to Canada, it's almost been a year now. In the cluster that I'm in, or the area, the geographic area that I am in is called Durham, and we had reflection gatherings. We have reflection gatherings and to talk about how we're advancing as a community. And one of the comments was, you know, since we don't have youth, then how can we really advance? You know, and what's really inspiring to me is that this cause is for everybody. And one of the very concrete ways in which we can advance, all of us, is just through the simple act of creating these spaces to pray together. And that in itself is a very powerful thing that should never be underestimated. Even getting on Zoom or getting on the phone and saying prayers with somebody else for 15 minutes and maybe talking about what those prayers mean and how those prayers might be energizing you in a certain way, or how they're helpful to the way you see reality, and having a space for that kind of meaningful or intimate discussion. That in itself is a very profound thing to do and should never be underestimated. And it contributes to the overall movement of the population of which you are a part, of the community of which you are a part as well. The National Spiritual Assembly, who is the governing body of the Baha'is of Canada, last July talked about the forming of having devotional gatherings in every household. And many people were saying prayers together in their households, but they didn't realize that actually coming together to say prayers in the household is a devotional gathering. And that simple act by itself is profound and needs to be recognized and needs to be thought about. And then you can, when you have that kind of a gathering taking place, you can then start to consult with each other about maybe here's the next step we can take. You know, maybe, for example, we can invite somebody to a fireside like tonight, or maybe we can invite somebody into a study circle, that sort of thing, and have those kinds of conversations. So I'm really glad you asked that question, Sheila, because I think that that's a very common question. And I would really hope that every single solitary person, no matter what stage of life they're at, recognizes that their contribution can be profound, and that even that small devotional gathering of 15 minutes with somebody else, say once a week, is a profound element of community building that can be built upon as well. Go ahead, Brent.
Can I just respond again before? I do that a lot. I'm always finding ways to invite people to prayer. And I thought then I would share one of my ideas with the group, and that is that I have a group called Walk, Talk and Pray. I like to go walking in the park, and I invite people to come walking with me and say, and invite them to say prayers as well, so that it's just a lovely outing with a spiritual tone to it. And we enjoy it very much, and people are now beginning to invite their friends to come and walk and talk and pray together.
Todd, I'm not sure if I have a question, and it's kind of formulating, but I wanted to talk a bit more about identity, the identity crisis and the politics around that. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are. It seems that there's been a massive proliferation of more and more units of identity in the last decade or 2 decades. In other words, in the past, it might have been sufficient that there was a national identity and maybe a political affiliation and a religion, but now it seems like it's out of control. You know, everyone has this tiny little pocket that that's how they identify themselves. And I don't know if that's accurate. So part of this is, you know, is that what you've seen? And maybe it's because of social media and our ability to see that more prevalent in our news feeds. And I'm wondering what you think, if that is the case, what is driving that? And so that's one question. What is really behind this need to be identified? And then why do you think it is a natural outcome of, if I'm identifying myself as this, that I naturally have a propensity to oppose others that aren't like me? Because that seems to be part and parcel with, if I'm this, then I'm not this. And not only am I not this, but I'm going to go out of my way to oppose it or put it down and so on. And so I'm just wondering what you think is happening in the world that is causing all of this division and this need for people to feel like they're part of something that's different from something else.
Yeah, so I agree with that perception, and actually is right in line with what the House of Justice says in that 18 January message, where the House says, seemingly countless permutations of us and them define group identities ever more narrowly and in contrast to one another. Over time, this splintering into divergent interest groups has weakened the cohesion of society. So there is exactly, that's, as you're saying, there's a splintering happening, there's countless permutations that are occurring. And in my understanding, there have been a couple causes of this. One cause is that we have embraced what Michael Colbert calls a culture of contest. So we have come to understand, because we've been enveloped in this materialistic mindset, that everything really is about competition, it's about contest, and it's about undermining the other in order to get ahead. And this has been a part of our culture for a long time. So that's one sort of major thrust. Then a second major thrust, which has sort of been woven in say the last 50 years or so, is this emphasis on consumerism. And consumerism has created the opportunity for people to represent themselves in multiple ways where they weren't able to do that before. So for example, in the 1950s, you would get a job, and this is the typical family, and as the male of the house, and you would be identified with that job, and that's who you were, and that's what your life was very much about. But since then, there's been such an emphasis on the consumer and trying to find ways in which to entice the consumer. And we've fallen into that, and we've become enticed with all of these different ways of manifesting what we think is our true individuality, trying to realize ourselves. And so we find it suffocating if we feel like the way we are is being defined by somebody else within this consumer culture. Instead, we want to be able to take a hold of who we are by purchasing certain things or identifying ourselves with certain products and then manifesting ourselves in that particular way. So there's the culture of contest, and then there's the consumerism side of things. And then, honestly, I think a large part of this is the fact that prejudice has always existed, but sometimes you have certain events that sort of spark. Well, I mean, with the shootings that have occurred in the States, for example, that sparks, or it helps to realize in an unfortunate way what has sort of been hiding for a while, and it brings it back out into the open. And as a consequence, people feel that their particular group of people is being persecuted, which is actually true. But as a consequence, they feel like they have to retreat into themselves and retreat into the groups in order to define who they are and try to gain respect as a consequence. So those three things coming together, I think have very much produced where we are. And then coupled with all of this, or sort of propelling all of this, is the rise. And I really want to be clear, I'm not against social media, so please don't take these comments as saying, thinking that I'm against it. But the fact is, social media is being used in nefarious ways and is propelling a lot of this, these dimensions of reality and encasing them in certain ways and helping us to think in certain ways, in certain echo chambers, for example, in a way that we never did before. So I think it's really for those reasons that we're at this particular stage. And it all boils down, without hoping I don't sound too reductionist, but it all boils down to the fact that we're not having these intimate conversations with each other anymore. We're not having conversations that are imbued with love. We're not having conversations that are imbued with recognizing the sacred element of each individual and recognizing, you know, the element that is who we are as a human species, those two fundamental elements which are tied to worship and tied to service. Those things have been eclipsed by those green elements about the unique self and the group self as well. So anyway, that's my understanding of it. I'm sure there's more to it than that, but yeah, I'm not sure if I'm getting at what you're asking, Brett, but.